Hello, and welcome to another episode in Voice of the Disabled, brought to you by Adaptive Chicago Productions and broadcast by CAN TV Studios, Chicago's public access station, from which we're speaking to you now. I'm Joel Margolis, your host for today, and with me today is Mr. Rob Rotman. Okay?
Thank you.
Rob is a longtime theater goer who also was educated in theater, and he's here to speak to us today about his many years of experience in attending theater, not only as someone who was educated in theater, but as a disabled person, and what perspective he's experienced as a result. Rob, before we get into your actual theater experiences, I think our viewers would like to know something about your background. Where were you born and raised?
Maquoketa, Iowa. It is an Indian name meaning Bear River.
And is that in central Iowa?
It's in eastern Iowa. It's halfway between Dubuque and Davenport.
Halfway between Dubuque and Davenport, in the northeast quadrant of the state?
Right.
Okay. And did you attend public schools in Maquoketa?
Maquoketa, K through 12. Yeah.
Okay. And from there you went on to?
University of Iowa, Iowa City, Iowa.
The University of Iowa,
Right.
which is in Iowa City. Okay. And for our viewers who may not be familiar, that is distinct from Iowa State, a separate school.
Iowa State is more engineering, agriculture, technical, even though University of Iowa is more the humanities.
Now, at University of Iowa, were you a theater major?
Yes.
And did you leave with your BA in theater?
Yes, and basically I just kind of stayed around Iowa City because it's such a nice place to live, and it just, people who graduate sometimes don't know what to do with their degree. So a few years later, what happened was through some people I knew, I got back into theater and pursued a degree, and I know we don't like this term, but an MA in theater for special populations. I had a little theater company called the Mainliners, made up of able-bodied and disabled people, and we did theater projects.
Now this sounds like this was a step towards a real specialization.
Right.
So you already had your bachelor's degree in theater. You stayed on in Iowa City for a little while, and then you entered a graduate program in theater?
Yes.
Okay, and that was theater for?
Special populations.
Theater for special
it was
populations.
An MA degree, yeah.
Okay. Now, was that a program aimed at using and employing special populations such as disabled?
Kind of, yeah, because another gentleman named John Bergman worked with people in prisons.
Okay, so there were a variety of special populations.
Yeah.
Now, was the goal here not only to involve the disabled in theater production, but also to produce theater that would be of special appeal to the disabled?
Kind of, yeah. What was neat in my company, we had one guy named Jeff Town who loved Star Trek, so we developed a whole script around him and Star Trek. It was just so wonderful.
Now, you mentioned developing a theater company. Right. Did you start that on your own?
Kind of. I worked with a gentleman named Dr. Lewin Goff, who was in theater forever, and he kind of gave me the idea and the input.
Was he a faculty member?
Yes.
At University of Iowa.
Yeah.
Okay. And how many years were you involved with this theater for special populations?
3 years. My degree took me 3 years.
And that was totally in Iowa City?
Right.
And while you were involved with this, you did a series of productions?
Right.
Now, were those aimed largely at disabled students within the student population or at the general population as well?
Both. Kind of a mixture of both, yeah. And we had one show we did called An Afternoon of An Afternoon of Doodledinks, and one of the able-bodied people in our class, it was a class, but we put on a little performance, said, I never know if I wanted to be around I'm going to use the term, we don't like it, handicapped people, but working with you all has really changed my mind. And another professor, a wonderful gentleman, Dr. Cosimo Catalano, said, I have never seen people enjoy being on stage that much in my entire life.
Whoa! So you
Yeah.
clearly achieved some rather special impact with this
and
work.
kind of interesting. Cosmo is an interesting man.
What
he
was
had
his name again?
Cosmo Catalano,
Cosmo Catalano.
Yeah.
Was he a faculty member?
faculty member, and it's interesting. He had a daughter who was a very active lesbian, and he directed. Just real quickly a production of Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour, and someone said, which is a play about lesbianism, someone said, for activists in the community, well, Cosmo Catalano must be very interested in doing plays about the gay population because of his daughter. So,
Now, after you left Iowa City,
Right.
okay, was it then that you came to Chicago?
Yes. Kind of what convinced me was Susan Nussbaum, the famous actress playwright, did a show called Staring Back in the early 80s. I think it started at the Schwab Rehab Center, moved to Second City, which was kind of a little comedy skit about disability, and that kind of interested me. Then, in 1987 at the Goodman Theater, if I can hold this up, she started production of Frank Galati's She Always Said Pablo, and where Susan played Gertrude Stein.
You said that what drew you to Chicago, at least in part, was a theater production by Susan Nussbaum?
Well, that was the original, yes, who is an activist, actress, playwright, yeah.
She was not only a playwright, but also she acted in theater.
Right, and she was in 1987 in this production at the Goodman, She Always Said Pablo, which was written, conceived, and directed by Frank Galati, who is one of the legends of Chicago theater.
So that particular production being done in Chicago
Right.
was a semi-magnet for you to
Yeah,
come here? So you came to Chicago,
Right.
okay. And did you do any work in theater in Chicago?
I've done a lot. I was, let's see, 1993, I think, was when the Remains Theater, the old Remains Theater, really got together a class, a workshop, with Susan Nussbaum and a woman named M.J. Schnell, under the direction of Mike Urban, which was a performance, kind of a performing writing class, and I got involved with that. Then about 2 years later, I was involved in the play Activities of Daily Living, which had a piece by the woman who was my muse, Tacky Limnicki. Susan Nussbaum wrote a piece. A woman named Bonnie Barnes, and then Susan and Tacky Limnicki, and Mike Urban, I'm sorry. So
after the experience of seeing this production at the Goodman Theater
Right.
done by
Now,
Susan
I didn't see the
Nussbaum,
original production.
you saw
I
later
just heard
production.
about it. I saw later
You saw-
production.
Okay. There was then a production done at the Remains
Remains
Theater in
Theater, right.
Chicago that was called
Activities of Daily Living. Actually, I shouldn't.
Activities of Daily Living.
I shouldn't. The first production by Remains Theater was a show called, which Mike and Susan wrote, called The Spunky and Plucky Show. I think it's Spunky and Plucky Show.
But it was at the Remains Theater that you actually became involved in doing theater in Chicago?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it was there in this production called Activities
Of Daily
of
Living,
Daily Living
1994, yeah.
that you actually took a role on the stage.
Right. Actually, I wrote and performed a piece.
Oh, in that you both were the writer and the performer.
Right, and Susan directed me in it, and it was
Okay.
a piece called Lee and Me, about my relationship with the famous playwright Lee Blessing.
So that got your feet wet in Chicago
Right.
theater. Okay. So by that time you were, if I may put it this way, well planted in Chicago?
Right, yeah. I
Okay.
did an internship at the Goodman in 1988, 89, and that was kind of an impressive thing too. I was always reading scripts by disabled people and issues, but my proudest moment at the Goodman in that year was that the Goodman brought in August Wilson's a piano lesson, and what was so neat was the director was Dean Lloyd Richards of the Yale School of Drama, who 60 years ago was getting ready to perform, I think, one of the great plays of the American theater. Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. And what was so neat is that I just past year, lost my good friend Glenda Gill, who's still is, Black scholar. And were both acknowledged in one of her books.
Okay.
So I got
So
to-
after your involvement at the Remains
Right,
Theater, okay,
Right.
then you became involved in a production at Goodman?
Well, that was just, I was an intern before I got involved with the Remains.
Oh,
Theater.
so even before the Remains Theater,
Right, I was
you were
involved,
doing
yeah.
an internship in theater at the Goodman.
Right.
Now, being an intern at the Goodman, what did that involve, actually?
Kind of making copies, reading scripts, monitoring casting calls.
So you were reading scripts that were submitted by a variety of people?
Play people, yeah.
Okay. And then people came in to do auditions?
Right.
And you were reviewing their auditions and
Auditions,
casting
yeah.
calls? And were you actually involved in producing the production once it got underway?
Not really, no. But
So you were more involved in preparatory work?
yeah.
Okay.
But I did do a lot of work helping actors learn lines, so that was interesting.
Okay.
yeah.
And from then on, you stayed in Chicago
Right,
continuously?
yeah.
Okay.
And I wrote, for a few years, I wrote a series of articles. There used to be a newspaper called Perform Inc., which dealt with theater, issues in the theater community.
So you also were beginning to do some writing for
Right.
the alternative
Right.
press, a publication called Performance Inc.
Perform Inc., yeah.
Performing, and were you doing that on a freelance basis?
yeah.
Now, were you writing reviews for them?
No, I was just writing interesting articles about high school matinees. I wrote one article called The Differently Abled Actor, which was about, how, the theater treats people with disabilities.
Okay.
And what's important there, that article really got me into work to do a internship at Access Living.
Okay, now, so you wrote an article about the differently abled actor.
Right.
And in that, were you taking a position urging the employment of
I
such
think employment,
actors?
yeah. There was, Joel, in 1988, a show came here from the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. called Images. It was about a black family. And it centered around a young man with cerebral palsy. And it was so mean-spirited, just so stereotyped. And at the end of the play, the young man with CP, he's in a wheelchair, and he's trying to kill himself. So the idea was that the artistic director, decide if this young man should kill himself or live. And it was just so mean-spirited and controversial.
So it was in this production about a black family that has a family member with cerebral palsy, okay, that you received a kind of a, may I call it, a negative motivation, that
Right.
you were greatly repelled or angered by
and
that
I know
production?
Mike Irvin was in the audience. I didn't know Mike then, but all the disabled people in the audience were angry. Yeah.
Okay, and that made you feel that you wanted to do something about
Right, be an
the
advocate.
portrayal of the
Right,
disabled in theater, and that played no small role in your involvement in this production that remains
Right,
about
right,
the
activities,
differently
right,
abled.
yeah.
Okay. Now, after that, I assume you went on to see a great deal of theater as
Right.
well as participate in it.
One of the best things, and you may hold this up, this is a cassette recorder. I think the best musical I've seen in this city is the show Ragtime, and directed by, I will hold this picture up, this incredible genius, Mr. Frank Galati.
And before we get on to that,
Right.
the cassette that I'm holding here
Is the cassette of Ragtime. It's the original concept album. It's not the original Broadway cast album, but the company, when they were in Toronto, did like what was called a concept album.
What
Like,
is a concept album,
it's kind
Rob?
of, it's just the score, it's nothing else. And I think like Evita and Jesus Christ Superstar were originally concept albums before they.
So this was the concept album
Right.
for
Right.
Ragtime.
Right.
And you were about to show us something else with regard to the
This is
Ragtime?
the genius Frank Galati. And I think one of the true godfathers of the Chicago theater. He is the gentleman that took John Steinbeck in The Grapes of Wrath and put him on stage.
Now, was Frank Galati involved in this Ragtime production?
Yes, he directed it, yeah.
And that was here in Chicago?
No, well, it premiered in Toronto. Then it opened in New York, and then it came to Chicago.
Now, was he involved in the
Oh,
production
yeah.
in Chicago?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, was this a production that made a particular impact on
Yeah,
you?
it was based on, for those who have not read it, E.L. Doctorow's novel about America at the turn of the 20th century.
Were you actually involved in this
No,
production?
no.
Okay.
But
But
the
seeing
book,
it made a strong
right,
impact on you.
the book it deals with, three families, a Jewish family, a black family, and a WASP family. And then you have all these famous people coming into contact with them. John Jacob Astor, W.E.D. Du Bois, and Henry Ford, and of course the immortal Emma Goldman.
So this production of Ragtime,
Right.
although you were not involved in it,
Right.
made a particular
It
impact
did, and
on
it's
you.
so much like Joel, the history of my family, my dad's family, my mom's family, and Henry Ford and Emma Goldman. So it's brilliant.
So it had a particular meaning for
Right.
you because you have a Jewish background and one of the families in the play is Jewish.
Right. Mhm.
Okay.
And I grew up with a black family. And Joel, what made this production remarkable was that there's a character, Sarah Brown Eyes, who dies in the book and, of course, in the musical. On Broadway, she was played by the incredible Audra McDonald. Here in Chicago, it was played by a woman named LaShawn Giddens, who the show was in 2000. In 2001, on September 11th, 2001, her husband went to work and never came back. So he died in the towers.
But to go back to the play
Right.
Ragtime for just a moment, it also portrays a black family in turn of century
Right.
America. And you say this had special meaning for you because you grew up with
With a black family. And
What do you mean by grew up with a black family?
Well, I grew up with a doctor. My dad and a doctor, heart surgeon in Iowa City were very close.
Who was black?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
the
that
con-
was a somewhat unusual
Right.
friendship for Iowa.
Right. Mhm.
So if I understand you correctly, in seeing this production of Ragtime, you saw something which related to your own growing up experiences
Right.
more so than other plays you'd seen?
Right. Yeah.
So it had particular meaning
Yeah.
for you. Now, as the years went on, did you see other productions that had particular meaning?
Well, I love one show I loved, and this was at the Goodman, Pal Joey, which wonderful Rodgers and Hart score. And what was wonderful, this is. I guess,
If we can get it out there.
I don't think, yeah. But it was just the wonderful Richard Rodgers, Larry Hart musical with great songs, and they were able to take the musical and bring it back to Chicago. It was set in Chicago, and just why people love musicals.
And as time went on, you saw other productions that made a major impact on you?
The Producers, which I saw when it came here in 2001. Mel Brooks, the comeback of Mel Brooks. And again, just the humor in it, that you have this 75-year-old man having a new career, and Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick, and just the show has so many great lines.
Whereas many people saw The Producers as a film,
Right.
it was the stage production that made the great impact
I mean, I
on
still
you.
love the original movie. How can you not? But the play, again, there's a difference. Musical comedy is that I think Mel Brooks returned musical comedy to musicals. Yeah.
And I notice you're holding some other material. Is
Right.
this about
Well,
other productions
Right.
you've seen?
Plays that I've been in. This production was a show that Susan Nussbaum, G-Man. I think we can get the whole thing. A Day in the Life of J. Edgar Hoover.
Now, this was not a production you saw, but one in which you
Yeah,
performed?
Susan Nussbaum directed it. It's about J. Edgar Hoover, Clyde Tolson, that takes place on a certain day, November 22nd, 1963. And it really just deals with Hoover.
And in this case, you were not involved in the prep work, but actually were on stage in the production?
And I played Frank Costello, the famous gangster.
You were playing a gangster?
Gangster, yes.
And you were playing it here in Chicago?
Yes, interesting, yes. And I'd like to do some of my dialogue, but it's not, I don't think it would go on this show.
And where in Chicago did this play?
It was at the Blue Rider Theater where we did activities of daily living.
Was that here on the north side?
No,
of
it was
Chicago?
in Pilsen.
That was in Pilsen.
Yeah.
I understand.
And this play just was so intense. Unfortunately, it didn't run that long.
as sometimes happens.
Right, yeah.
But you're holding other material
Right.
as well. May I
and
ask
then,
what
of
else
course,
you
my
have?
work with Techie, I've worked with her, and for thauthose who want to see a picture, this is the famous Techie Limnicki.
Now, exactly who is Teki Lamneki?
She is the co-author, the founder of Telling Tales Theater.
Okay. So
And-
Teki is a woman here in Chicago
Right.
who started a theater company of her own?
Right. Mhm.
Okay. And what is special about it, or what has special meaning for you?
I think just the show I did, she does every year, she takes kids and adults and has the adults mentor the kids, and they do shows revolving around a theme. I was in a show called 6 Stories Up, 6 Who Climbed Mount Everest, and here, I think I can, this is a picture of me when I played Tenzing Norgay, if you want to.
Is this another production by Teki Lamneki?
Yes, and this is her children's show where she has adults and children work together.
And this play was called?
6 Stories Up, 6 Who Climbed Mount Everest.
Now, was this also part of her theater company
yeah,
called Telling
yeah.
Tales? Now, they don't have a theater of their own,
No,
do they?
no.
So did they perform at a variety of
That was
places?
performed at a theater downtown, yes. So, but and then I also, in that production, Mike Irvin wrote a piece about the famous Ed Roberts, who really was one of the founders of the independent living movement. And Mike said, look, I'm really not an actor, so why don't we have Rob do the role? And here I am in my iron lung. Mr. Roberts lived his life with an iron lung.
And here you are in the role of
Ed Roberts.
Ed Roberts, a man who
lived with an iron lung
Lived
and
with an
basically changed the perception of people with disabilities.
And this was produced here in Chicago?
Right.
About when was that?
That was, 2000, no, I think 2005, yeah.
And what theater did this play at?
It was at a little theater across the street from the Cultural Center. I remember the name, unfortunately, I don't remember.
It was
now.
downtown on Randolph Street?
Right, Randolph Street, across the street from the Cultural Center.
And here you were playing someone with a disability
Right.
different from your own?
Right.
Okay.
And
this was written by?
Mike Irvin.
And Mike Irvin is a?
Of course, Mike Irvin is activist, blogger, playwright, yep.
Who has been involved with theater in Chicago
Right.
in a variety of ways.
Right, yep.
I understand.
And then, of course, I have also worked in the last, I think 10 years, she's had a program called Diversity, where people write monologues and do solo pieces about their life.
Now, this is?
Okay, that's a piece I did my first time with Diversity, Brick and Me, where I play an actor. Well, actually, I play myself auditioning for the role.
This is you in a piece called?
Brick and Me.
Brick and Me?
Brick.
Brick and Me.
And of course, I am auditioning for the role of Brick.
And this was written by?
Me.
Written by you?
Yeah, so the solo shows, the people write the piece and then perform them.
And was this also produced by Teki Lamneki?
Yes, or Diversity. It's called Diversity, and it was performed at the Prop Theater on North Elston.
So Teki has been involved in a variety of productions,
Right.
not only with her own Telling Tales Theater, but also with other theater companies?
Right, but her primary work is the Telling Tales.
Her primary work
Yeah,
is with the Telling
yeah.
Tales Theater Company. Did we accidentally miss a piece here on
I
the
don't,
floor?
that was the review of the show, and it was interesting. You can
A review of which
yeah,
show?
Well, the show 6 Stories Up, and it's kind of interesting because the review was kind of negative, and I find that it said this is theater for a good cause, not to be professional. So it's kind of a pan. And so yeah, that's the barrier, Joel. I feel people with disabilities face in the arts is we're just doing it to be nice. We're not doing it to be professional.
So the significance here,
Yeah.
in a moment unusual for
Right,
television,
right.
we're highlighting a negative review of
Right.
a theater production. You're saying that the review was negative regarding the artistic quality,
Right.
but the reviewer nonetheless said that this was a good vehicle for a disabled person?
Kind of it was theater to be nice, not theater to be professional.
Theater to be nice.
Not to be professional.
In other words,
yeah.
theater to be nice to the disabled.
Right, yeah.
And do you feel that that was an unfair
I
put
think,
down?
yeah.
Okay.
And then if you could hold back the Brick and Me, the little piece of paper. That one, no, the one on, yeah. And so that piece I wrote about, I'm auditioning for the role of Brick Pollitt and in Cat on a Tin Roof, and I get the performance. So it's kind of, we do the pieces, they have to go somewhere, and you change, you know. And it's the proudest thing I've done in Chicago theater.
And this is you in the production
Right,
Brick and Me.
Right, you know, as a part of diversity.
Okay, now in this negative review that we spoke
Right.
about a moment ago, in which the reviewer saying that this is theater to be nice to the disabled,
Right.
do you feel that the reviewer has put his or her finger on an issue that runs through a variety of productions about the disabled?
I think that, you know, we just want, it's just to educate, not to be professional. And I think that really is a put down, yeah.
So you feel that theater about disabled characters,
Right.
okay, is sometimes perceived as merely a vehicle to highlight the disabled?
I think, yeah.
And in that sense, do you think the reviewer is missing something?
I think, yeah.
What is it that the
I think
reviewer
they're
is
just
missing?
missing that, you know, they're just looking at their own perception, not other people's perceptions, yeah.
So do you think that there's a larger problem here in which the portrayal of disabled characters, okay, is somehow often misinterpreted by
Right.
reviewers?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
In which
mean, to
reviewers
me,
have... Go ahead,
You know,
please.
I think it's good, you know, I mean, you have the Glass Menagerie, which some people feel is not a fair portrayal of a person with a disability. I saw a production here by the Black Ensemble Theater about 20 years ago of the Glass Menagerie with a woman named Diana Jordan, who is an African American with CP, and it was brilliant. I mean, to me, it brings out another depth to the role.
All right. Well, if I hear you correctly, okay,
Right.
we have a continuing problem in American theater in that the playwright and the actors might portray a disabled character,
Right.
okay, with an intent to raise some issues,
Right.
not merely disability, but other issues as well.
Right.
And do you think that this is often missed by the reviewers?
I think, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I just, what bothers me, you know, is that, you know, I like it. I mean, to me, what I like to see is a play where you use an actor with a disability in the play so you can bring out another, you know, maybe perspective on it. Yeah.
Well, I think that we're running out of time here, but before we actually totally close this, it sounds as if you are raising not only one issue, but possibly a variety of issues and related to portraying the disabled in theater?
Right.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me as if we have a lot more to talk
Right,
about
yeah.
here. And rather than try to do it all now, can I ask you that you'll come back to us on
I'd
another
love
occasion?
to, yeah.
And on that other occasion, can we go into greater depth about the portrayal of
Right.
the disabled
That'd
in
be good.
theater?
Yeah, I like that.
Sounds like we have a
Thank you.
lot more to discuss. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today on Voice of the Disabled in my very interesting conversation with Mr. Rob Rotman. And I hope you will join us again on other episodes for Voice of the Disabled, brought to you by Adapt of Chicago Productions, broadcast by Can TV Studios. I'm Joel Margolis, your host, saying goodbye, but only for now, because we will be back with many other episodes and hope that you'll join us again. Thank you.